Grief by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, 1806 to 1861. I tell you, hopeless grief is passionless, that only men incredulous of despair, half taught in anguish through the midnight air, beat upwards to God's throne in loud access of shrieking and reproach. Full desertness in souls as countries lieth silent bare, under the blanching vertical eye glare of the absolute heavens. Deep-hearted man express grief for thy dead in silence like to death. Most like a monumental statue set in everlasting watch and moveless woe, till itself crumble to the dust beneath. Touch it. The marble eyelids are not wet. If it could weep, it could arise and go. Okay, this is a sonnet by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She is a romantic poet from the northeast of England. She was born near Durham. And she was born into a wealthy family. Her family money came from slave plantations, sugar plantations in Jamaica. So, what's this about? Well, this sonnet is about grief. It's about sadness. It's about what it is to be really truly sad, and it speaks about how people deal with grief. And she says that people who really feel grief are silent about it. People with deep hearts who feel strongly. These people don't say anything. And it's saying that the dead, if the dead could cry, they would. And she says that the people who scream and yell and cry out loud, this is not real grief. This is something very, very different. Okay, so anyway, this is a sonnet. I tell you, hopeless grief is passionless. So grief without hope, deep sadness without hope, is not something which is full of passions and strong emotions. It's not something where people scream and yell and jump up and down. It's mute. Now let's see. It's most probable that she wrote this after her brother was killed in a sailing accident. He was drowned at sea. And I think she was very close to him. But I think this is from the Victorian period, where grief and mourning for people who died was a very common thing. That only men incredulous of despair, half taught in anguish through the midnight air, beat upward to God's throne in loud excess of shrieking and reproach. So only people who are incredulous of despair, who don't believe in despair, only these people beat upwards in half taught in anguish. So this is something that they do because it's something they've learned, and they shriek, they cry, they yell, they reproach reproach the situation. Why did this have to happen? And they do this loudly, and they are loudly crying to the heavens. They're crying to God, and saying that this is unfair. This is not acceptable. They're beating upward to God's throne, and she's saying that nobody who's is really depressed does this, because they don't have the energy to do it. Full desertness in souls as countries lieth silent bare, under the blanching vertical eye glare of the absolute heavens. But when you are really upset, this is like a desert. This is something that is empty. It is the emptiness of desert in souls as countries. So this is a desert in your soul, as in a desert in the land. There is a desert in your soul, and the desert, it lies silent and bare. It just lies there with nothing, with no sound, under the blanching vertical eye glare of the absolute heavens. So we've got this metaphor of the desert and the sun beating down on the desert, and she's saying that this is like the real feeling of grief, or how she feels grief. It's like a desert with the sun beating down, or the reasons for the grief beating down constantly on this desert of feeling, this empty space in your soul, in her heart, where there is which is absolutely empty, and it's blanched. It's bleached. It's cooked. It's had everything taken out of it, and there is nothing left in it. Deep-hearted man, express grief for thy dead in silence, like to death. So somebody who has a deep heart, somebody who has deep feeling, they express grief for the dead in silence, like death. So somebody with a deep heart, somebody who has real feeling, this is a person who expresses grief with silence, with a death-like silence. That grief is like death. It's like death itself. It's death of all feeling, death of everything inside. Most like a monumental statue set in everlasting watch and moveless woe, till itself crumble to the dust beneath. So this grief, it leaves you like a statue, like a monument, and it's just there, it's unmoving. It's always watching this woe, this sadness, and this is a statue that will be there until the end of time, until finally the sadness crumbles, it breaks up into the dust beneath. So it's something that will stay there solid, unmoving, until time finally causes it to decay. This is something that is solid and unmoving. Touch it. The marble eyelids are not wet. If you touch it, if you touch the eyes of the marble statue of grief, it's not crying. It doesn't even have enough passion to cry. It doesn't have enough feeling to cry. It's not able to cry. It's just so empty. The emptiness is so great that there are no tears. If it could weep, it could arise and go. If this grief could cry, then it could stand up, it could move, and therefore it could go. So if this sadness could cry, then the grief could leave, the grief could disappear. And the grief continues because the person is unable to move, they're unable to cry, they are a marble statue. So, Grief by Elizabeth Barrett Browning.